See everything that's good.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to continue our series of Sages of the Ages. This is the publicity for those who are watching at home or wherever you may be. We are continuing now tonight with the second in our series, and our subject is Rabbi HaChaim ben Moshe ibn Attar, who is better known as the author of HaChaim. And we'll discuss his biography, and also, as in the past, as is our style, we'll also take the opportunity to consider some examples of his writings, and including some classic or perhaps inspiring examples of his literary legacy, which is so very important. So he is known as HaChaim, but more reverently known as HaChaim HaKadosh. The designation HaKadosh, the Holy, is not associated with every great rabbi, with every distinguished Torah personality. Even the greatest are not normally or not almost automatically associated with the term HaKadosh. I saw it suggested that and it's especially popular among the Hasidim, the idea of, thank you, the idea of the HaChaim HaKadosh. And it's been suggested that there are three great sages of Israel who are known as HaKadosh. They all made Aliyah and obviously to the land of Israel. So our subject, HaChaim HaKadosh, Shlah HaKadosh, that is Rabbi Shai Halei Horovitz, who wrote a book called Shnei Luchot Habrit, known as Shlah HaKadosh, and the third one is the Al-Shich, Rav Moshe Al-Shich, whom we discussed here at Ner Yisrael, actually, last time around. Rav Moshe Al-Shich is also called HaKadosh. There is a fourth who is also known as HaKadosh, but not so much for his writings, but for his essence and his legacy. That is, of course, the Ari HaKadosh. He did not make Aliyah. He was born in Yerushalayim, although he grew up in Egypt. So in a way, he did make Aliyah towards the end of his life, that he moved back to the land of Israel. But technically, he was born in Yerushalayim. He moved at a very young age to Egypt, to his mother. So we did Ari as well, so he's not for tonight. But we will find that Ari actually has an influence and is a very important source of inspiration for our subject tonight, Rabbi HaChaim ibn Attar. He was born in Morocco, in Saleh. Saleh is nearby to Rabat. Rabat is the capital of Morocco. Saleh is like you could say, a Jewish suburb of Morocco. And although it wasn't ever a large and thriving city in Jewish terms as well, but there were scholars, there were important personalities who lived there, and as in many cities in Morocco, the cemetery is very well tended and very well supported by pilgrims, visitors, etc. And although he's not buried in Saleh, the fact that he was born there is enough of a reason for the local community to take great pride and to draw attention to all visitors, Jewish and probably others as well, that the great HaChaim lived in our town of Saleh. He died in Yerushalayim in 1743. If you do the math, you can tell that he did not live a long life. His life was cut short by a plague, and we'll learn more about that as we go along. He was only 47 years old at the time of his death, and he is buried on Har HaZeisim, the Mount of Olives. And one can visit his kever, not quite as safe right now as it was in the early days, early for me. I remember when one could go to Har HaZeisim very easily and very readily. One could walk there and all of that. Not so much recommended nowadays, but one can still visit, and many, many people do, especially on his yahrzeit, which is the 15th of Tammuz. He is known, I mean, you see here on the page, I hope you have in front of you, he's reverently known as HaChaim. I would say he's venerated as well, one of the few personalities, Torah personalities, even among the greatest, about whom we can readily say he is venerated, certainly by Sephardim, but most especially by Hasidim. But he's respected, and his writings have a great influence and great, have a high, let's say, not just a high profile, but he's very highly esteemed by all educated Torah Jews. In whose category I would like to include myself as well. I studied HaChaim. My friend for the year, many years ago, and I didn't get that much from it. And looking back, maybe I wasn't ready for it, but I studied it again 2 or 3 years ago, and I found it very rewarding, very captivating, very edifying. And as I said, we will in due course get to some examples of his writings, and I hope you will agree that the esteem in which he is held is certainly well justified. So he's known as HaChaim because of this parish, but people sometimes are not aware that he was also a great and esteemed Talmudist and halachist as well. He wrote a parish on the Talmud called Rishon LeZion. It was actually published posthumously, I think. He wrote another sefer called, I think, Eretz Chayfetz, or something like that. Chayfetz is in the title. Can't quite remember the rest of it, which was actually his first published sefer. Maybe I have a note of it here. Published in 17. Doesn't exactly matter, but he published it before he published his famous HaChaim. He had already written a commentary on several tractates of the Talmud. Even as a young man, we'll get to some stories and legends about him in due course. He was very, as I said, highly regarded. He also wrote a sefer, which you may or may not have heard of, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch called Toar, which is largely a critique of another halachic commentary on the Shulchan Aruch called Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash was written by Rabbi Chizkiah da Silva, another Sephardi, and Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar had a lot to criticize about that. He found it much too makil in many cases, and he wrote his sefer Pri Toar, and it was essentially designed as a critique or a response to the Pri Chadash. So, and his halachic works are cited by great, towering halachic figures like the Noda B'Yehuda, like the Pri Megadim. The most mainstream and the foundational achronim in the halachic universe also cite HaChaim's halachic works. So he was a person of great, of penetrating and a vast Torah erudition, but certainly his greatest legacy lies in his Torah commentary. I'm actually holding these right now. I'll just pass them around. By the way, this is HaChaim in English. I know someone's going to ask me, is it available in English? It is, published by Art Scroll. I'm holding one of, I think, 10 volumes. So if you want to buy it, obviously it's a great idea if you've got the shelf space for it. So that's HaChaim Torah in the Art Scroll version. This is, I'll just pass this one around as well. No, if you want to just, that is published recently, probably 20 years ago. That's recent when you're as advanced in years as I am. And there it is with nikudot. It's with full vowels. It makes it a lot easier, to read with vowels and with, doesn't have any notations, but it does have the citations and that sort of thing. To be honest, I sometimes wonder why they publish a sefer like this with the vowels, because it makes it accessible to someone who's Torah skills are at an intermediate level, shall we say, but the content is quite challenging. So it doesn't really lend itself to the casual reader who requires the nikudot, but having said that, they are useful, and I found it useful as well. This is recently published, and this is a reprint of one of his halachic works, together with some pirushim on some other svarim as well. I'll just pass that. Sorry, you have the middle of the agenda. And finally, I'm just going back here so everybody can see me. Yeah, finally, I want to also pass around for those who are here, this HaChaim Likutim. Now, this was only, well, it was only published, only came to my attention when I was in the middle of my year of learning HaChaim, and I was teaching it as well. And actually, although I didn't draw upon it very much, I have found it very useful subsequently. This is like selections, has a little abstract, and selections like gems or the greatest hits of HaChaim Likutim, it's called. And to be honest, I picked this up for free. I was learning at HaChaim Yeshiva, which I've been learning there every morning for more than 30 years. And one fine day, a person, someone of blessed distinction, put about 20 copies of this, and it said free to take. So I took one. I could have taken more, but I thought I'd like to leave others for other people. I could have come here with 10 of them and should have handed them out, but anyway, I didn't. So this is one, and it's also very useful if you can get hold of it, because those are selections and with a little intro as well. So it's a very excellent entree into the teachings and the Torah of Rabbi HaChaim ibn Attai. Let's talk about the man. So it says he was the Rabbi of Saleh. He was the rabbi in a few places. The truth is, when he was a young man, he was in the business. Well, he wasn't so much in the business because he came from a distinguished family. Let's start with the background. Attar means spice or perfume in Arabic. His family came from Spain, and it was presumably among the Megurashei Sfarad, who came to North Africa, as many did after 1492. And his family was probably in the spice trade. They were a wealthy family, distinguished family. In his lifetime, in his generation, they were more in the fabric trade, the thread trade. But it seems they were prosperous, and he married a relative, and his father-in-law supported him, and that was great. He was a bit in the family business as well, but he quickly became renowned for his learning, for his piety, for his generosity. And maybe now's a good time to tell you one of the famous stories about HaChaim. I say it's famous because I first heard this story many years ago when it was recounted right here by the late Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, Zichron Livracha. So he related this. I didn't hear it from him, but I heard it from someone else who heard it from him, but I've seen it in print a few times since. So here's the story. There are a lot of legends about Or HaChaim HaKadosh. You can imagine someone who is so venerated, it's almost inevitable that legends will develop around him. Some of them probably have a germ of truth. Some of them may be the product of the more ambitious imagination of his followers and admirers. But anyway, this is a famous story and a great story. He was in the habit of supporting like Talmid Chachamim who were poor. He was a Talmid Chacham who was wealthy. He was from an affluent family, so he had Talmidim and admirers, and he would provide for them. And his minhag was he used to shecht an animal, probably a sheep, let's say, every Friday, and he would supply meat to all of those who were in need. So one week in the town of Saleh, the animals that were shechted, many of them were found to be treif. So the good Yidden found themselves without adequate meat. But his animal, of course, according to the story, was kosher lemahadrin, it was glatt kosher. Anyway, so he had plenty of meat. So a wealthy man came to him and said, look, my butcher, my supplier has nothing for me. Can I buy some of your meat? So Or HaChaim said, look, I've got the minhag that I have people who rely on me, poor people, and I provide meat for them. So the wealthy man said, yeah, but I'm going to pay. So he said, yeah, it's not a matter of payment. As they were talking, one of his regular clients came in, a man who was a Talmid Chacham and poor, and worthy, and he gave him meat. So this rich guy said, well, you're giving him meat, and he's just a schlepper, and I am a rich guy, and you're not giving me, I'm going to pay for it. So Or HaChaim didn't say anything. Afterwards, whether it was in a dream or something like that, he realized that he was held accountable for the fact that he didn't speak up in defense of the poor Talmid Chacham who was impoverished and was dressed in the way of the indigent, and he should have spoken up on his behalf. And because of that, he was like Nigzar Allah, that he has to go into Galus, go into exile. This was something that many great tzaddikim used to do, whether for, we say, kaparat avonot, for expiation of sin, or because they wanted to subject themselves to the feeling of humility and rootlessness that comes with the life of the vagrant. Many people used to do it. The Baal Shem Tov did it, even the Vilna Gaon did as well, and many others. The famous Heilige brothers, Rabbi Elimelech of Luzensk and Mezusha of Anipol. I'm sure you've heard stories about them. Some of them, again, probably maybe are true even. And the HaChaim also went into Galus. He was dead. He was like decreed for a year. So he decided, okay, he's going to go into Galus. You may wonder about whether he had a family. He had a wife. He had no children. He had no children at all. And he died childless also, and we'll get back to that in due course. I presume he was married at this time. He told his wife, I'm going into Galus, I'll be back. And he went from town to town. The whole idea of going into Galus is you don't go with an entourage, and you don't go with wearing chalukah derabanan, with rabbinic garb. You go anonymously, and that way you suffer the indignities of the vagrant, the archi-parchi, as we say. And so he did, and he went to one town, and there are stories like this. So he went to, he was going from place to place, and one day on Erev Shabbos, he sat down in a forest outside of a certain town, and he sat down on a rock to rest a little bit. And as he was sitting there, he was thinking, possibly it was Parshas B'chukosai, and he was thinking about the Parsha, and he was mechadesh. He discovered, he innovated in his creative mind 42 answers to a very fundamental question. And Parshas B'chukosai, we're going to read it in a couple of weeks. And there's a fundamental question in Parshas B'chukosai. I'll tell you the question. I won't tell you his 42 answers, but I'll tell you the story about the 42 answers. The question is, in the portion of B'chukosai, the Torah says, if you walk in my statutes, etc., things will go well with you. You'll have rain in its proper season. You'll live in peace and prosperity and a lot of other nice things. The question is, why doesn't the Torah there or anywhere else talk about the reward in the next world? Why does the Torah allocate or indicate that the reward for mitzvah observance is prosperity and success in this world? What about olam haba, schar olam haba? It's a fundamental question, and he asked that question. Many other Mefarshim do as well. But he has 42 answers to that question. Okay, he picked up his satchel, he went along the way, went into the town. And in the town, probably he went to shul Friday night, and one of the benevolent, God-fearing members of the Kehillah saw him among the passing indigent, and he invited him home. So he said to his guest, after dinner, we're going to go to the Rav. We've got a great Rav here, HaChaim, and he's going to give a drasha. He is able to even access the chidushim that have been revealed in the yeshiva shel mala, in the heavenly academy. So, okay, they finished the meal, they went to the Rav, and the Rav had a few people, and he was darshaning, and he gave 14 answers to this question. And they were the 14 of the 42 that he had thought of. And he said, this Torah that I'm sharing with you is not my own. This is the chidush of the great, renowned, venerated Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, that he has been mechadesh, and in Shamayim they have such great hana, they feel, so to speak, a kind of glow from the teachings of this great rabbi who is very, very well known to us, and I am sharing that with you. So when he heard his name, Rabbeinu Hagadol, the venerated Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, so he said, like under his breath, but in a way that everybody could hear, Chaim ibn Attar. So they looked at him and they said, what? Chutzah, the great, or HaChaim, he hadn't published his book yet, so they didn't know him by that name. Chaim ibn Attar, you're saying he's just called Chaim ibn Attar, chutzpah. And they said to his host, they looked at him as if, why are you bringing these lowlives to us? You should be more discerning who you bring into your house. Anyway, they went home the next day after lunch. They said, let's go to the Rav, we'll hear more Torah. So they did, and a similar thing happened. He revealed a further 14, and he said, this is taught in the yeshiva shel mala from the great Rabbi Chaim. And again, he said the same thing. The man himself, obviously incognito, he said, Chaim ibn Attar. That's enough. So this time they said to him, look, chutzpah, if it weren't Shabbos, we would punish you right away. You should know that we don't punish unless we at first issue a warning. You've been warned twice now. So again, as you imagine, Shalasudis, the Rav again gives the drasha. He reveals 14 more. And he says, from the great Gaon Hagadol, Rabban Shel Kol Bnei Hagolah, Rabbeinu Chaim ibn Attar. And again, the man says Chaim ibn Attar. Now this time, you know how it works you weren't Hasidim, we're Sfardim, Shalasudis ends late into the night. So it's already after Shabbos, they threw him into the locked room, they've got like a hold there in the show. They threw him in there and they said, you stay there until you learn your lesson. They thought they'll leave him there for a day or two. And anyway, they started to daven Maariv, and then a big storm began. Terrible storm, and they thought this is unusual. What's happening? So I don't know whether the rabbi, who was obviously quite a special person, the legend does not disclose his name to us. It was revealed to him that the reason for this storm is because after Shabbos, so the souls of the departed who are punished in Gehenna have to go back to Gehenna. On Shabbos, they're free, but after Shabbos, they have to go back. So the Sar Shel Gehenna was making a ruckus because since Rabbeinu Chaim ibn Attar didn't make Havdalah because he couldn't, he was locked up over there. So there was no Havdalah. Since there was no Havdalah, he couldn't get back the souls of the Rashaim to punish. But he was upset because he's losing out on his, using work. So he was shaking up the world. Okay, no doubt the story has many mythological components. Perhaps there's a germ of truth to it as well. However it is, it's a great story, and it reflects the reverence and the esteem in which Rabbeinu Chaim ibn Attar was held. And he was still probably a young man at this time. But his greatness and his sort of ability to bring about impact in the world was already renowned at that time. Okay, let's perhaps proceed to a bit more concrete matters. I mean, there's another legend I wasn't going to tell you, but since we're into the legends, so he also had a little bit of a lion's den experience as well. The Sultan threw him into the lion's den, but he didn't trouble him. The lions, retreated with their tails wagging, and the Sultan thought, I'm not going to start up with this fellow after all. To return now to the historical record, in 1725, his father-in-law died. And he left an estate, but the estate was contested, whether by heirs or by the government who wanted to levy exorbitant taxes on the estate. And suddenly this great Rabbeinu Chaim ibn Attar was under scrutiny of the government, and it wasn't safe for him to hang around anymore. So he went to Meknes and then to Fez. In 1738, and in those places, he basically got out of the business world. He lost his wealth, and he was not exactly forced to wander. As I said, he was highly esteemed. So wherever he went, I'm sure he was greeted with great respect, and he established a yeshiva in those places as well, in Meknes and then in Fez. But there was a severe famine in 1738. It was so severe that many people died, Jewish people and other people as well. And many people, among them, Rabbeinu Chaim ibn Attar, went to Tetouan. Now, Tetouan was at that time the city of, like the capital of Morocco, the diplomatic center, and the European embassies and ambassadors were all in Tetouan. And there was commerce there. It was a wealthier town. It wasn't dependent on the crop and on the drought and that sort of thing. So that's where he went, but he had already decided, I've had enough of Morocco, I've had enough of the persecution, and I've had enough of the impurity of the land of the heathens. I want to go to Eretz Yisrael, I want to go to Yerushalayim. He said here in the Galus, he said the people are tameh, the culture is tameh, the earth is tameh, the water is tameh, even the air that we breathe is tameh. He felt that he wanted to breathe the land, the air of the Holy Land. But they didn't have direct flights in those days from Morocco to Tel Aviv, nor did they have direct boat routes. Moreover, he had writings that he wanted to publish. So his first sefer was published, I know I made a note of it here, I just can't seem to find it, in Amsterdam. Yeah, Chayfetz Hashem, that was his first sefer, Talmud commentary in 1732. And he published that in Amsterdam. He didn't go to Amsterdam, but he must have sent it. And it was published in 1732. But he then wrote two further svarim, which we mentioned already. Pre-Toar, which, as I said, is a great halachic work, great in the sense of influential, highly respected. It was the product of his Talmudic and halachic brilliance and erudition. And he had with him the manuscript also of HaChaim. And he wanted to publish that. They had no printing presses in Morocco, and he needed to go to Europe for that. Moreover, he wanted to raise some money so that he could travel to Eretz Yisrael and he could set up a yeshiva there. He had followers, he had students in Morocco who were prepared to come with him to Eretz Yisrael, and he felt in Italy he could attract more students and he could attract some support as well. So he went to Italy, to Livorno, in order to publish his Svarim and in order to raise money so that he could continue on his path to the land of Israel. Actually, before the famine drew him to Tetuan, and then he went to Algiers in 1739. Algiers at that time was an important Jewish community, and it's interesting, he got haskamot, like approbations, from the rabbis of Algiers for his Svarim. Of course, now, as often happens, he is much more well known than the rabbis who wrote the approbations, but I suppose at the time he needed their support, and he got that support in Algiers in 1739, and from there he made his way the same year to Livorno. In Livorno, he was a great hit. His charisma, his saintliness, his learning, his erudition. He must have been a gifted orator as well, possibly not quite as gifted as our friend from last week, Kleyakar, but he must have been a very able communicator as well as a holy and saintly personality, because we have testimony that in Livorno, it was standing room only. People had to come early to his drashas because otherwise they couldn't get a seat, or they couldn't even get through the door. In Livorno, while in Italy, so he talked up his plans and he raised money there, also in Venice, also in, where did he go? I've got the page here. He went also to, doesn't really matter, Modena, Ferraro, Reggio, Mantua, Venezia, all the nice places to go for holiday. But he went there as well. He didn't go for holiday. He went to teach, and he went also to attract Talmidim and to raise money. Those were wealthy communities, certainly wealthier than the poverty of North Africa. And it seems he was reasonably successful in that regard, because within a couple of years, he had published his Svarim. So he published HaChaim in 1742 in Venice, and in this edition that I'm holding in my hands, they have also reprinted a facsimile of the title page from Venice. You probably can't see it there. I'm not going to pass this around because I need it in order to share with you a couple of comments that he says. I suppose I can pass it around if you want to. Just give it back. Doesn't matter. Anyway, it's just interesting, the illustrations here. I don't know if they're Jewish, but okay, that's just by the by. It's not the whole illustrator of the book. It's just the frontispiece, the bookplate, or the Sharblat, the title page. In Venice in 1742. When he was in Italy, he heard about a great rabbi called HaAbulafia from Izmir, who had made his way to Eretz Yisrael. Remember, we're talking here in the first half of the 18th century. Long before, or a couple of generations before the Talmidei HaBaal Shem Tov, the Talmidei HaGra, the European arrivals in the land of Israel were very, very few at that time, very few. And immigrants were also not that many. We have who came to Tzfat and others like the Spanish emigres. But after that, the numbers were not substantial, but there were certain great people, like we mentioned before, the Shla and Moshe Alshet. The Shla came from Prague, actually, so he was Ashkenazi. And anyway, he heard of this Rabbi HaChaim HaAbulafia from Izmir, who went to Tveria, and he established the yeshiva. And he thought, if he can do it, I can do it too, and I would like to do it, and that inspired him. And he set off in the summer of 1741 with 30 souls, some Talmidim who were married, some children with his wife. Some say that because he was married all those years and didn't have children, he took a second wife. I saw that in one source. I'm not sure whether it's true. I didn't see it in other sources. Could be so, because a man of such distinction who was married without children, and again, in his culture, to take a second wife was not unknown. So it could be that he did, but I don't know. It could be just pure speculation on the part of that particular source. In any case, he had an entourage of about 30. They set out from Italy. Their intention was to travel to Alexandria. Again, they didn't have direct boats that went from Livorno, or probably where he set out from, to Jaffa. But they went to Alexandria, and from Alexandria, they wanted to take a boat to Jaffa. As they approached, the captain decided he's not going to Jaffa, he's going to Akko instead. Now, some say it was just a lucky escape, and some, or perhaps he did it deliberately, because when they got to Akko, they learned that in Jaffa and in Yerushalayim, there was a terrible plague, and people were dying by the day. So they ended up in Akko, and having arrived in Akko, he settled in Akko temporarily. And he was teaching there, teaching his Talmidim, maybe others came to him as well. 2 of his Talmidim died in Akko, possibly of this plague, even though it may not have been sort of rampant in Akko. And he felt that maybe it was because there's a machlokis in the Gemara if Akko is part of Eretz Israel. So he decided he's going to go to Piki'in. Piki'in is definitely part of Eretz Israel. He was in Piki'in. And then he decided, and I'm not saying he just changed his mind all the time, it may have been part of his original intention, he's going to visit some of the tzaddikim and the Tanaim and even biblical personalities, many of whom are buried in the north, in that part of the land of Israel. And he went with his Talmidim, and he went to pray at each kever, to pray for the redemption, etc. Of course, he wasn't going to leave the area without going to Meron and Tzfat. When he approached Meron, so according to the accounts, normally they went on donkeys, and they got to where they were going, they dismounted and they prayed. As he approached Meron and he saw the kever of the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he dismounted and he went not on foot, on all fours, on his hands and knees, to climb the mountain. He wanted to humble himself. He thought, how can I walk upright, like a tourist, walking into the kever, the tziyun of Shimon Bar Yochai. And he went on his hands and knees as if he's not worthy of standing in the presence of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So they say in the legend, and as I say, it could be true. HaChaim was not kind of average rabbi. His greatness and his humility and his connectedness to the souls of the tzaddikim was something of a different stature. After his death, a few generations later, Reb Chaim Tzanzer wrote that the HaChaim had Ruach HaKodesh. He said it's clear to anyone who reads it, or maybe anyone, but he said, when I read it, said he must have had the Ruach HaKodesh. He was, you could say, of not just a different generation, an earlier, greater generation, but he was a soul that does not come into the world very often, who knows, once in a century or something like that. Of course, he then went to the main city in the Galil, which is Tveria. Tveria is a proper city. Tzfat was a little village, Meron even less than that. Piki'in, these were basically Arab villages. Tveria was more of a city, even in Roman times. In fact, it was a Roman city. And Tveria had a bit more commerce. They had a bit of fishing on Yam Kinneret, and they had this yeshiva. So he went to Tveria and he liked it a lot there. He liked them and they liked him. This HaAbulafia was already mature in years, and he felt as if he's not going to live that much longer. And he said to Rabbi HaChaim ibn Attar, stay here, you'll succeed me in running the yeshiva. I don't want to be cynical, but I'm sure he knew that this Rabbi HaChaim ibn Attar came with money from the Italian Jews to start a yeshiva. So he says, look, you got the money, you got the greatness, you stay here. And he was quite tempted to. So Rabbi HaChaim ibn Attar wrote a letter to his Italian backers, basically to ask them, do I have your permission? I was going to start a yeshiva in Yerushalayim, but can I do the yeshiva here in Tveria instead? And this Rabbi HaAbulafia, who, I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of him, apparently a person of great stature, also wrote a very eloquent, very compelling letter saying what a wonderful thing it would be if the one that we know as HaChaim would stay. We don't know what response he got. Maybe they told him, you were telling us in Italy you're going to Yerushalayim, the holy city, near the Kosel, near the Makom HaMikdash, and it's going to be a great schus for us. We'd like you to fulfill your intention. I'm being a bit cynical, speculating. I don't know if he did hear back from them, but the fact is he did not stay in Tveria, but rather he went to Yerushalayim in accordance with his original plan, and he arrived in Yerushalayim on the 15th of Elul, 1742. There he started his yeshiva called, I think, Knesset Israel, Medrash Knesset Israel, and the yeshiva, I was going to say flourished. He didn't find a lot of space in the old city of Jerusalem. We've all visited the old city of Jerusalem. You can imagine for yourself, especially in the 18th century under Turkish Ottoman rule, the hygiene and the sort of living standards and the space was of a very dire nature. He basically occupied a base medrash of another Rav who was already there, where they became good friends, and that's where his yeshiva was established. It was a kind of elite yeshiva, but it was a yeshiva that was functioning at a very high level. And in fact, after the death of HaChaim, one of his Talmidim published a sefer that was essentially the productivity of the year study in the yeshiva. Actually, it was less than a year because he died on the 15th of Tammuz, less than a year later. He arrived in Yerushalayim on the 15th of Elul. He died on the 15th of Tammuz, 10 months later, in a plague, at a young age, as I said. He had a number of notable Talmidim, but his most famous Talmid was certainly the Chida. And Chida was my friend for the year a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago. I found it really inspiring, an amazing polymath. He's not on our greatest rabbinic hits this season. Maybe we'll do it on another occasion. Chida. And in his Perushim on the Torah, Chida is Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai. I don't want to tell you about him because we'll get sidetracked. In his Perush on the Torah, in his Perushim generally, he quotes HaChaim from time to time, but not as often as I thought he would, because I knew he was a very famous Talmid of the very famous HaChaim. I realized why, though, because HaChaim only lived in Yerushalayim for 10 months. And Chida was only 18 years old at that time. Chida really lived in Hebron. He must have come to Yerushalayim to learn from HaChaim, and he did learn a lot from him. I've no doubt. He probably learned more from him in a day than I would learn in my entire lifetime. But because he had limited opportunity to learn, so he quotes him, as I say, not infrequently, but not as regularly as I might have expected for that reason. Tragically, he lived in Yerushalayim, as I said, only for about 10 months. But we have a literary record of some of his experiences there. He himself writes, and Chida fills in some of the blanks. On Yom Kippur, he says that when they opened the ark for Kol Nidre, he felt as if he was gazing into the heavens, into the Yeshiva Shalom. And he said it was like he was transported to another place. Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, he said the prayers, the intensity of it was so uplifting. He felt as if they're surely going to bring Mashiach. On Hoshana Rabbah, he stayed up all night learning, and there's a whole description of what he did and what he prayed. And according to Chida, it possibly has some legendary components. He was told min hashamayim that he could bring Mashiach. In fact, there's even those who say that he himself would have been Mashiach, but the generation was not worthy. And because of that, instead of redemption, the forces of negativity prevailed, and it was going to be devastation for the Jewish people that year. But instead, he himself, HaChaim, perished, and the rest of the generation was spared. It's again part of the legend which they say. He died Mutsai Shabbos on the 15th of Tammuz, and the legend is, and this I keep saying legend, it's found in many Hasidic sources, this story. The Baal Shem Tov was just washing his hands for Shavuot Sudas in Mezhbesh, because when it was already Mutsai Shabbos in Yerushalayim, it was before sunset. He probably did after sunset, but in any case, it was still Shabbos for them in Mezhbesh, washing his hands. And at that time, at that moment, it is Challah, and at that moment he said, the eastern light has been extinguished. So what do you mean? He said, HaChaim has passed away. Others say that they came in maybe to the Baal Shem Tov in the morning, one fine Sunday morning, and they saw him sitting on the ground with his shoes off, observing Avelos, and he said, my great Rebbe, my great mentor, HaChaim has died. Now, they never met, but the Baal Shem Tov would have known of him through his writings. His writings were published in 1742, HaChaim was published in 1742, he died in 1743. But it's not at all impossible that his Sfarim would have reached the Baal Shem Tov, and it probably didn't take him a year to learn it like it took me a year. Baal Shem Tov probably, learned it in a short period of time, and he regarded himself as a follower, like a disciple of the HaChaim. And they say, Hasidim said that he wanted to go to Yerushalayim to learn from the HaChaim, and they say that he would have brought Mashiach if they had gotten together. In any case, he knew through some means of the passing of HaChaim. Now, at this point, I'd like to make use of the little page you got in front of you. If you look in the upper right, so I have chosen this excerpt because Hasidim say that this hints to this story about the Baal Shem Tov. Vayakam paro laila, tam omro laila. The reason it says it was at night, aderech omram in the Zohar Kio, so laila hayat kiyom yair kitzachus hayom. That night, it was like day for the Jewish people, and that night it was Yisrael. Laila kiyom yair. Even at the end of the seder, we say those piyutim, we say it refers to this midrashic tradition that there was light, not just in the plague of darkness, light for the Jewish people, but the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was light for Klal Yisrael. It says, "V'ramazti remes pasuk v'higatata levincha b'yom hahu." You shall tell your son on that day, ki chavein lomar sheyagid lo gam nes halayla shenasa yom. It's a remez, says HaChaim. Tell your son, Bayom Hahu, on that day, tell your son that the night that we left Mitzrayim was like the light of day. He says, but it says, Vayakam Paro Laila. For Paro, it was dark as night. So the Hasidim say that the Baal Shem Tov was utilizing this light which is a spiritual light, this light which he felt emanating from the Or HaChaim in Yerushalayim, and he felt that the light had been extinguished. Okay, it's maybe a little bit of a remez. Of course, I'm going to allude to the actual story because this was published in 1742. He only died a year later. In any case, he couldn't have written it after his death. In any case, so I'm saying it doesn't refer to the story, but it's the idea of the symbolic light, the metaphorical light, the brilliance of the light. In the minutes we have left, I really want to give you a couple of examples of the writings of Or HaChaim. Let's take a look firstly at this short second paragraph in the English sort of biographical lines. The most famous of his works is Or HaChaim. In this work, he employs the four methods of exegesis, pshat, the simple meaning, durash, homiletic interpretation, remez, and sod. Or HaChaim is, I think, the most significant personality to popularize the teachings of the Ari and the Kabbalistic teachings generally. I mean, the Hasidim, Sephardim, many others have written, some Litvaks and some Yekish as well, by the way. There are a lot of Yekish, German, Jewish Mekubalim as well. It's interesting, but there were many. But in terms of popularizing, in terms of someone whose writings have been reprinted innumerable times and who appear, of course, as you got on this page here, on the standard Mikros Gedolos as well. Someone whose writings are so widely accepted and studied and appreciated, and they're relatively accessible. One doesn't have to be an advanced scholar to understand Or HaChaim, especially now you've got the art scroll as well. It is very accessible. And he is one of those, I think, probably the most prominent popularizer of the teachings of the Ari. I'd like to share with you an example of a classic theme which Or HaChaim mentions a few times. This can be found, as I say, in more than one place, but I want to read you just a few lines from his commentary on the end of Parshas Vayigash. In the Parshas Vayigash, the family of Yaakov have made their way down to Mitzrayim. And at the end of Parshas Vayigash, it says, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen. Israel, meaning the Jewish people, Yaakov, Israel, and his family, they settled in the land of Mitzrayim. So he asks, Lama kafal lamar be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen. Why say the land of Egypt, land of Goshen? What's the need to specify Goshen, or just say they lived in the land of Goshen, which we know is kind of a suburb, a part of Egypt? And in any case, why emphasize, why tell us that the Jewish family settled in Egypt? We know in some detail how they came down to Egypt, which is mentioned earlier in the Parsha. He says the reason is the purpose of the Jewish people being in Egypt and the purpose of exile altogether. He says, Sibas Yeridas Mitzrayim hi laha'alos nitzotze hakedusha asher nispazru uva'u shama. In order to redeem, to elevate, to free the sparks of holiness that have been scattered there, have been scattered to Egypt. And that's why it says, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, shimakom klipa hamazuhemes. It's the worst place. It's the ervas haaretz. It's the nakedness of the land. It is the land which is degenerate, which is corrupt, which is like the antithesis of the spirituality and the refinement that the Jewish people have brought into the world. But they had to go to Egypt to collect the sparks, because this is a doctrine which he develops in other places as well, that after the sin of Adam and Eve, the sparks of holiness were dispersed throughout the world. And the Jewish people, our destiny is to collect those sparks. He asks elsewhere, why couldn't Hashem have punished the Jewish people, if need be, in their own land? Why the need for the dispersal, for the exile? Why were we driven from the land of Israel to Bavel and to the Mediterranean lands, to North Africa and to Southern Europe and to Northern Europe and even to England, dare I say to America? Why was it necessary to go to all of these places? He says there's a reason for it. There's a purpose. It's in order to liberate the sparks of holiness. And he says that the more degenerate a place is, the more effort is necessary to redeem the sparks. He says elsewhere, Hashem told Yaakov, don't be afraid of going down to Egypt. So he asked, I need you to go to Egypt for the purpose of a great nation. And he says the meaning is, he's quoting here he refers to Shimon Bar Yochai, but actually it comes from the Ari, the teachings of the Ari, which the Ari just developed the ideas in the Zohar. Kitam hagolius levarer chelkei hakedusha mefuzarim ba'anfei haklipa. Ki le'erech godel hatuma yeh b'kirba chelkei hakedusha. In accordance with the depths of the depravity and the degeneracy of the place, the kedusha will be just as great, but difficult to extract. This is his doctrine, which he develops in a number of places. He doesn't claim it's his own. On the contrary, he's sharing the teaching. He's popularizing the teaching of the Ari and the Kabbalists generally. The other two citations here in the Hebrew you can certainly read on your own. I wanted also, though, to mention something which is pertinent to this week's parsha. It's nice to also share something from HaChaim, which is in our parsha. Svartim lachem. So again, this is just an example of an idea which is provocative, but I find it very attractive, very appealing, something that reflects the Kabbalistic tradition. And again, it's part of why this Sefer is so venerated by Hasidim and so many others. The Torah says you shall count for yourselves 49 days, 7 weeks, as we know. So why does it Usfartem Lachem? You could just say Usfartem. The word Lachem, at the simple level, it's just a stylistic feature, like Lech Lecha, Shlach Lecha, Brach Lecha, Usfartem Lachem. But at the deeper level, there's certainly a meaning to it. He says, Omer Lachem, L'tzad she'itzav Hashem ispor sheva Shabbosos. Hashem says, count 7 weeks. Now, he doesn't say it outright, but he's alluding to the fact that in the laws of Nida, it says that a woman should count the safra la. She shall count for herself. Now, you don't need the la, could you say the safra? And again, at the simple level, it's just a stylistic feature. At a deeper level, though, when it says Sfartem lachem, okay, there's a halachic implication. She shall count for herself regarding a woman who's counting those days. But says the HaChaim that Hashem said, count 7 weeks. A woman in her monthly cycle counts 7 days, 7 clean days. Here, the Jewish people have been in the contamination of Mitzrayim for a long time. He says, God wanted to join the Jewish people in a kind of cosmic marriage union on Har Sinai. The Jewish people are the bride. Hashem himself is the groom. That experience, that intention means that Hashem and the Jewish people are going to be joined and united in holiness. The Jewish people have been in the depravity of Egypt for so long. So he says, just as a woman counts 7 days to achieve the readiness for the Tahara, so the Jewish people had to count 7 weeks. She has to count 7 clean days. So Hashem commanded the Jewish people to count 7 weeks. Then they will be ready to be united, to be joined, to be brought under the chuppah as a bride, as Hashem is the bridegroom. I find this a very beautiful, very compelling, slightly provocative maybe because of the imagery, but this is an example of the inspiring writings of the HaChaim, and really his parish is overflowing with gems, suffused with gems of this sort. I'd just like to mention by way of conclusion that he was born. The legend is that the Ari was born in the building that would later become the base medrash of the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim, his base medrash is still there. You can find it in Yerushalayim. There's a road called Rehov Or HaChaim, and the base medrash of the Or HaChaim is in the old Yishuv Museum. Well, the next time you go to Yerushalayim, do yourself a favor and visit something which is off the beaten track. You know, you're not going to find it on TripAdvisor very highly. I'm sure it probably is there, but it's not going to be in the top 10 tourist attractions. But it's worthwhile because you've done all the top 10 tourist attractions in the land of Israel. you won't be disappointed. I mean, it may not delight your children. You'll say, yeah, but where's the high tech and all of the things? But it's fascinating. It's worth a visit. It's the Museum of the Old Yeshiva. You see the poverty and the primitive nature of life for the Jews under the Ottomans, under the Turks. And the third floor of that building is the basement of the HaChaim. It's on Rehov HaChaim, and it is today the Museum of the Old Yeshiva, and it's worth visiting there. His kever, I have not been to his kever. I would like to go one time. The Gera Rebbe said, and many of the Rebbes and many others have gone there, and they say different Yeshuas. People go there, especially to daven for Zera Shel Kayama, those who have not yet been blessed with children. They go there because the Gera, for lots of reasons, but the Gera Rebbe said that HaChaim had no children. He infused all of his creative potential into his sefer. And if a person learns his sefer, they say someone learned the sefer as a skula as well, but people go to that kever because although he was not zocha for children, but they say it's a skula that those who need can go there. I'm certainly not one to be dispensing advice about these kinds of things. That's well beyond my pay grade. But I'm just telling you what others have said about the kever of HaChaim. And that you remember my Kehila went there not long ago. He sent us a photograph of himself next to the kever. And it's something very, very inspiring. One of the great personalities, one of the great tzaddikim, one of the great saintly, holy personalities, and his legacy is brilliant even to this day, even though sadly his light was extinguished prematurely in 1743. Thank you very much, and look forward to getting together next week when we're going to learn about the Vilna Gaon. We're going to go from Morocco, Italy, Eretz Israel to Vilna, Yerushalayim, the Little. Okay, so join us next week for Vilna.